David said, we have two more classes, and so we'll be looking at tonight. We'll be looking specifically at those who are new converts or those who are visiting here and what that says about our community and the responsibilities we have towards them. Just real quickly, this is kind of what we looked at last Wednesday. These kind of our, I guess, the backbone of our class as we've going through these things. Not a bad thing to keep in mind throughout our lives, our responsibilities toward God and those around us, and then to ourselves. It's always good to be thinking about priorities in life, and this is a great way of organizing things. We talked about this in dealing with conflict, in dealing with these things, and how do we as a family of God deal with conflict? What are best practices? What are things that we're supposed to be doing? The responsibilities either side has towards one another in those modes of conflict. We talked about kind of a healthy way of dealing with it. Obviously, there's some unhealthy ways of dealing with conflict. And then we talked briefly about when conflict happens, what was our takeaway from our last class, things we might need to be doing in connection with conflict, and those that we maybe need to talk to, things that we need to work on. Because in the end, we can only change who? Us, right? I got to work on me. And we got to work on ourselves and where we are and what our perspective on things. And I kind of told you last time, I've learned a lot in dealing with conflict, going through conflicts, and usually we turn out better and we grow. We can grow if we do it in a healthy way. So we talked about that last Wednesday. Going through today, those who are new and visiting, what responsibilities do we have towards them? If I love God and I love my neighbor, there are certain things that are expected of us, right? Those who are new to the Lord's church and those who are visiting, those should be those that we are caring most for. Not to say that we don't take care of one another and that each one of us maybe have things that's going on where we might need more help from time to time, but in general, we need to be looking out for those who are new or those who are visiting. What does Luke 15, verse 7 say about rejoicing? What does Luke 15, verse 7 say about rejoicing? Do y'all remember offhand? What parable was being told in the context here? What's that? The lost sheep, right? Dealing with sheep. Sheep are cute, aren't they? Sheep are cute. Sheep are not smart, right? Just in case you're not unaware of that, sheep are not the most intelligent creatures. And in this case, Jesus is talking about the rejoicing of finding the one and that was lost. And rejoicing with this sheep. In verse 7, I tell you in the same way, there will be more joy in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who need no repentance. And that almost is kind of like the backbone of the kind of a lesson in the prodigal son, that sometimes the ornery brother in the story of the prodigal son needed to learn this lesson as well. That this one that came back, we need to rejoice. So those who are coming to Christ, they're coming out of unrighteousness into righteousness, and those who are visiting are possibly looking into that. And we are part of rejoicing of heaven when that does happen and helping others come to Christ. So we need to see that it's a joyous thing to have visitors, and then those who are new in the faith, that's a joyous thing for us to be part of. Matthew chapter 7 talks about those who might be seeking. What does the Bible promise? What does Christ say about those who are seeking? Seek and ye shall find. Knock and the door will be opened to you. Why is that important? Do you think there are people out there actually wondering about or thinking about what it is to be righteous, what it means to follow God? Do you think there might be people out there? Maybe you were one of those that wandered in here and in some ways, in the past, we might have used like the church building as, have you ever heard of Field of Dreams, the Field of Dreams? Right? Some of you, I can talk about that in here with you guys. I can't talk about that in the high school class. But Field of Dreams, what was the line in the Field of Dreams? If you build it, they will come. Have you heard about that in evangelism? We have a building that has a steeple. We just need the people, right? So if you build it, they don't necessarily come. Right? That's not how it works. right? It's not Field of Dreams evangelism. And so there are those who are out there looking, right? And the Bible talks about the dragnet and talks about different ways of this imagery about, a field white unto harvest is the imagery. We need to be out there helping, right? If there are people that are seeking, how do we know if they're seeking unless we're doing what? We're talking, we're asking questions, we're involved in their lives, right? You see how that kind of plays into those who are seeking. And so sometimes, through various modes and methods, those people who are seeking do come here. They do come into the door. And that's a time, and we'll talk more about that in just a moment, but that's important. We get to be a part of that process. And maybe we're not the person. We don't know when somebody comes into the door, and somebody who finally makes that decision to be baptized, put on Christ in baptism, become a New Testament Christian. We don't know everything that's happened in their background to lead them to that point. Maybe we were the ones that studied with them last. Maybe we were part of sowing the seed or getting that thought in there initially. And sometimes it takes a while for that to germinate. Very, very few of us hear the message one time and run forward and are baptized that same sermon, right? It doesn't happen. It takes some time for us to mull things over. And so we don't know where we are, but we get to be a part of that process. Those who are looking, but we need to be outwardly looking as well and attentive to those who are looking. Look over in Colossians. Part of our responsibility as Christians to those who are new is to help them grow. What are things that are provided? What are things that are done to help people grow? Here at Palm Beach Lakes, to be specific. What's that? Classes. There are classes that are provided for every age. If you can sit up until it's more difficult to sit up, you have everything in between. We have classes for every age group. So we have classes. What other things are available to those who would like to grow? Opportunities to serve. Serving is a great part of growth. Serving, there's many opportunities to serve, ways that we can be involved, get involved here. And as far as getting involved, every place we go to is different. We'll talk about that in a moment. But those are things that we can do to grow. Getting involved in one another's lives and growing and close to one another, that's part of it as well. Those are different things that we can do. In Colossians chapter 1, Paul says, we proclaim him, capital H, obviously Jesus, admonishing every man and teaching every man or person with all wisdom, so that we may present every man complete in Christ. For this purpose I also labor. And this needs to be part of us as Christians, as those who are here laboring together at Palm Beach Lakes. In this community we're trying to build, that needs to be something that we are mindful of. Yes, I have a responsibility to myself. Yes, I need to work out my own salvation with fear and trembling, and there's things that I need to keep in check for me. But we also need to be looking, and we've talked about this before, looking out for others. What am I doing to help other people grow in the congregation? And if we think about those things, am I helping people get to Bible class? Am I teaching a Bible class? Hint, hint, we need Bible class teachers. Are we doing things to serve and bringing other people and helping them get plugged in to serve? Am I making sure that other people are getting involved and getting to know other members of the church? And we've talked about that before as far as inviting people over and inviting maybe other members over so we get to know one another and develop those relationships. So there's many, many things that we can be doing to help this growth process. And we get to be a part of somebody's growth to the point that they will be able to go and do likewise, right? And we want them to be able to grow and do that. So it's not just me coming to church, me coming, to church, me coming to services, I'm checking in, I'm worshiping, and going home, but what's on the peripheral as I'm here? How am I helping others that are here? What am I doing to be part of somebody's growth process in all of these things? So looking out to those who are new and those who are visiting. And I want to cover something that I think we've covered in the past, and I got to make this little neat chart. It's fun to make charts. Maybe for me it is. Cultural adaptation curve. Have y'all heard of this before? Okay. Have you heard of culture shock before? Culture shock. Did you know that coming into any kind of new environment, there is culture shock. Kara and I we were studying what culture shock was and preparing to move to Paraguay, and so we were just as ready as possible. I cannot tell you how many, I think I read everything on the internet that had to do with Paraguay before we moved to Paraguay. I used it all up. And part of this was, this idea of cultural change and what to expect when you're going through this culture shock and changing things. And as we were reading it, it just kind of dawned on me, like moving from like Tennessee, Smallsville, Tennessee, down here to South Florida, we totally had culture shock moving down here. And you may have had culture shock when you go into maybe a new job that maybe you're just barely qualified for, or is outside the realm of something you've done before, and you're kind of thrown into this position. I've said before that at one time, I think the job that scared me the most was working in a factory and working in this place where all these salty people, not like Jesus salty, but like salty people, and all this terminology and the lingo and the shifts and what's expected of you. You have a break now, and there's a whistle blows, and you have a break, and you're kind of like, okay, what do I do now, right? So it takes some time to kind of grow into those things, but you go through a process. And it's not hard to see this process here and relate to it in some ways. When you rush into something new, something that's exciting, we call that what? What period? The honeymoon period, right? Like maybe a new job is new and exciting initially, and like, oh, I'm gonna make my lunch every day and put this in, and it's just so much fun. And you have that, like the new person on the job that comes in with all the energy, and you're like, whoa, where are they? Where are they? You've seen that person, right? And that's the honeymoon. And then like the newness wears off, and it's not as shiny as it was. And in different cultures, all these things that you thought, well, yeah, this is neat and exciting, it's different. And then it's so different, it gets to the point where I'm so tired of different. So tired of different. Why can't they just do it the way I've always done it this way? Right? Well, one thing for me was at the beginning of the month when we were in Paraguay, it was time to pay the bills. And I had to go to every single physical location to pay the bills for the water, for the electric, for the rent, and actually drive to these locations and pay the bills. And it was like old school, like nobody does this anymore. Why do I have to do this? And then the process for doing everything took so long, and these people drive crazy. They have no respect for anybody else on the road. And like all these things that are different, that initially were exciting, initially was neat and exotic, becomes a burden because you become this overwhelming newness. The language is different. The modes of doing things are different. What happens when we get into that side of things and my happiness meter goes down? What kind of emotions start happening then? What's that? Anger is one. Frustration. It is no longer fun. We are no longer in Kansas, right? So what else? Anxiety is a big one. Anxiety is a big thing that kind of like creeps up on you. So those are all things that are stress. It actually affects you physically. You could lose weight, you could gain weight. There's all different things that happen with that, and it's that hostility moment, or things like you are not at one with your surroundings, and you're in a new place. And obviously, depending on the severity of the change, the severity of the hostility maybe. But when somebody comes into the church, are they learning anything new? One or two things, right? One or two things. A lot of things. Is there new language? What are some uniquely Christian? What's some uniquely Christian language? Fellowship. Do we use that? I mean, maybe in like technical terms, I belong to a fellowship, but we don't use that in the biblical sense necessarily. What are some other uniquely Christianese words? Trials and tribulations, right? So there's a lot of different things that happen. We have this lingo, and then you're singing songs, and you're like, I have no idea when I've ever raised in Ebenezer, right? If I have, was it fun, right? So there's all these different things that you're coming into Christianity, and you're like, what in the world? I do not understand what's going on here. All these people seem happy most of the time, but I don't understand. And so there's this, maybe some possible hostility when maybe there's frustration on their part trying to get plugged in. And part of this can be when people come into the church, I think there's two ways that people kind of jump into things. And I liken this to the on-ramp going on southbound 95 at either Indiantown Road or Donald Ross. Do y'all know those on-ramps? Okay. So the southbound on-ramp, you have two options, okay? One option that a lot of people take, and usually in smaller cars, and they don't use their blinker, is they will stay in the far right lane that says merge, eventually merge, eventually merge, and they'll just stay there and just look at you like, it says for me to merge, right? And I'm just supposed to get in, okay? And so maybe this is a situation where people are others are, well, I'm here, you're supposed to help me merge into the church. I'm here, why aren't you getting me plugged in to the church? Is that wrong necessarily? Maybe that's just how they're approaching us. Their approach to life, they wait to be responded to. And there are others who are like they're going to change lanes. Like I'm more of I'm going to get in my spot as quick as possible and get away from these people over here that just want to merge. You see, there's others that will jump in to a scenario, and there are those who will jump in to things and get in there, and they will actually get up to speed instead of trying to merge into highway traffic at 45 miles an hour. I don't have a problem with that, I promise. So that happens. So those two different modes or ways of looking at people getting involved in a congregation. And that's where if we're aware that people are going to be going through this process as they come into the Lord's church, as they come in and be a part of any group, if we're aware that this is going to happen, will we be more attentive to they maybe don't know how to get plugged into item X, or they don't know where the family groups are, or they don't understand these things. And we do have information for them. They do get a packet. They do have a class. Tim does a class for new members and stuff. But how many of you have had orientation classes and forgot something, right? So.
It helps us, I think, if we don't so much think of bringing somebody into a new culture,
Mm-hmm.
but bringing somebody into a new family.
Yes.
If your brother brings a new girlfriend in and they get married, you have added a new person to your family. And they're not going to know all the funny jokes, and they're not going to know all of how your family does things.
Yep.
But you're going to be really careful when they first get there to be nice and to ease them into it.
Yes. Did y'all hear that? So part of it too is like thinking about it looking at it as them coming into a family. And every family has its own kind of microculture, words that are funny, jokes that are funny, things that are acceptable, not acceptable, and shoes off or not at the door, all those kind of things that belong to a certain family, a certain household. And we've done that, right? We've acclimated into a family. We've helped others acclimate into a family, and kind of helped them go through that process, and help them to be successful. And we want people who are coming in to be successful. And part of that is where they learn to we use the word humor because it's an H, but they humor or they understand this is the process, and we start learning, all right, this is just how it is. For me, when I was in Paraguay, again, it's an extreme example, but I was not going to change that country. I was not going to change their driving habits. I was not going to change their processes on anything. Guess who had to change? Me. I had to change. And I had to just well, this is how it is, and I will learn to do that. And that's part of a growth process. But having people there to help you and understand and deal with those frustrations, it took me so long to find a dessert that didn't have dulce de leche in it, that finally when I did, it was amazing. But all those little things that seemingly are not important in the moment, but you have those that help you along the way. And then you can get to where this is normal. I'm climbing up into normal or high, happiness meter range, given everything being equal. And it takes some time. And that 6-month thing is actually very real. When we were in Paraguay working with new converts, and we had a calendar, and we said, all right, this person is coming up on 6 months. And we saw between 6 and 9 months, there was sometimes a decline in their attendance, decline in their involvement, a decline, and we were very attentive to where somebody was along this path, because we recognize that you're coming into something very different, and it takes some adjustment, especially if your family is not supportive of it, if they don't have any family at home, if they're single, if they're dealing with Catholic families, those are all, they add to the hostility of a new environment as well. And so helping us understand that this is where people will, and it's not as extreme, maybe, but it is a process of somebody coming into any kind of new anything. You will go through something similar to this, and being aware of it, and how can we help somebody get plugged into the family, and get plugged into to things here, and help them find their place. So we've talked about these before, but how do these things help? How do these attributes help in serving others and ministering to others who are going through that process? How do these help?
If we look at these folks who are coming into the church as baby Christians,
Mm-hmm.
we don't expect them to know everything that somebody who's been in the church for 40 years will know.
Yep.
If we have love, if we give them that patience, and expect that they're going to give us patience too, because and hope that they do, because we're all still figuring out how to be a blended family.
Yes, and that's a key element. If we're doing this in a way that, again, patience and helping them, but also understanding that, you know, we too will need that in turn at some point, that we aren't like these perfect examples, that we struggle as well. That helps make it very real. Yes, sir.
All these things apply them to one person. It builds their self-worth and value in that community.
Yes, did you hear that? Helping people find their value or self-worth in the group itself is very, very important. And that goes a long way with finding a job, finding a place, where do I fit in, you know, in this family unit? What am I doing in the body of Christ here? And helping them get plugged in is important. Them helping them understand their value to the family at large, that they have a place and that they are wanted here, that they are loved, that we are devoted to them and to their success, and that we are not adversaries in their success, and helping them, bearing with them as they grow, and helping them in a lot. So there's a lot of different things here that we can do. There will be times maybe we have to admonish, we have to talk to them about some things that are different, but again, doing it with patience and love, because there may be days when they've talked to us, right? There's something that we are all kind of in this together and helping one another. But being aware of this and acknowledging this and helping each other is very important. Because again, and I will tell you, I'm worse about this because I come here and I with a certain like work hat on, I got to talk to this person and this person and this person. We've got this event coming up, and does that happen to you guys too? You got your calendars, you got your schedules, you got your certain people you're talking to, and all of a sudden, your peripheral is like this. You're super laser focused, and you're not looking around. So we need to kind of make sure that we're paying attention to things that are happening around us. I want to look at a few passages that kind of deal with this in a way, and I recognize that these are not 100% for this, but can fit in. There are certain applications here. Look at Romans chapter 14. We'll look at Romans 14 and 1 Corinthians 8, kind of deal with this concept in dealing with new Christians. And I don't want to, this isn't just new Christians that deal with this. This is everybody deals with this in some aspect. But a lot of times, new Christians, as they're learning things that have changed in their life, things that they're getting rid of, there's this kind of, can I do this, can I not? And there's a responsibility of us who are mature in the faith to help them in that process. In this first verse, in verse 1 of chapter 14, now accept one who is new in the faith. Let's replace weak there. I don't want to get that kind of concept stuck in our minds that new Christians are necessarily weak, but they're new. They're still growing, and we all are in some ways, but not for the purpose of just passing judgment on them. We don't want to. We want to accept them, but not for the purpose of just being super judgy on them. Do you understand what is? Do you know what I mean when I say like super judgy? Have y'all used that terminology? I think it's common vernacular now, right? Somebody can be judgy. Sister Lou, who better than you? Do y'all have ever met that person in a congregation that just tells everybody what they should be doing? Have y'all met that person before? She does not hear. She's not here. In other places, I've met somebody like that, but not here. Verse 3, the one who eats is not to regard with contempt the one who does not eat. And this is talking about meat sacrificed to idols, but it can be anything, right? If we want to use just an example, he who wears a tie shouldn't judge somebody who doesn't wear a tie. Can we say that? Let's just be fair and just use it and update this a little bit. It's not the same thing, but it gets the principle across that we need to be careful with like our kind of across the aisle like judgments of people and where they are in their growth process and helping them to grow. We need to be very careful with that. Yes, ma'am. Oh, yes. We'll be getting there in just a moment, but yes, that is, no, it's good, that's good. That's exactly the idea, is that sometimes we're judging about things that that God isn't. And that's what this text is kind of talking about, is God is not judging people based on these things, but we set up another system that is not there. Now, there are things that we need to be careful in helping one another to be involved in, and we'll get to that passage in a moment, but this one's dealing with things that are not that are matters of the conscience. These are things that are matters that will, for me, I can't do item X. But that's for me. I need to recognize that that's for me. For me, I must wear a tie on Sundays. I must. I do not feel like I'm worshiping unless I wear a tie, and others do not feel that way, and then maybe don't wear a tie. But you understand what we're saying here? That is not something I can bind on somebody else in relationship. Because, verse 3, for God has accepted him, where God has accepted this person, not based on whether they eat meats or not, or in this case, our example, not whether or not they wear a tie, but God has accepted that individual. Verse 7, for not one of us lives for himself, and not one dies for himself. If we live for the Lord. If we die for the Lord. Therefore, whether we live or die, we are the Lord's. What does that mean? What does that mean in service to others? How about this attitude? I'm going to do whatever I want. I have my right to do this thing. I don't care who it offends. I'm fine. Who's that person living for? Themselves. That's living for yourself. If I've died to Christ and I'm living for others, I recognize that, yes, I have this right. But in certain circumstances, I won't exercise, I won't do this thing because I don't want to cause somebody else to stumble because I'm not wearing a tie. Right? And it's not a huge deal. There's 1,000 ways to tie it. Maybe I can learn some new things. But you understand what I'm saying? Like we don't want to lose a brother or a sister because of something, because we're living to serve other people, not ourselves. And that's part of this idea, is that those who are new, those who are coming in, those who are visiting, we are servants first, in helping them understand what that is to be. Verse 13, therefore, not let us judge one another anymore, but rather determine this, not to put an obstacle or stumbling block in a brother's way. Verse 15, for if because of food your brother is hurt, you are no longer walking according to love. If for a tie your brother is hurt, you are no longer walking according to love. You see where we're going with this? So this whole chapter deals with this back and forth. Here's a group of people. One group will eat meat sacrificed to idols, and they'll even go in and eat, at the, meat sacrificed to idols bagel shop, right? And they have no problems with it because they recognize there is only one God, and this stuff, whatever they did to the meat prior to this, it means nothing. But to somebody who's coming out of idol worship, it meant a lot, and it meant something in the past, and so there's that stigma connected to it, and so they see it as like, well, we have to stay away from that altogether. And so you have two sides of this. Neither one is right, neither one is wrong, but it is wrong if it's against your conscience, and that's what this text tells us. It's wrong if it's against your conscience. If you're doing something and it's against your conscience, it is against your personal. This is where your salvation, you need to work on that, but it can't be something that we judge others on. So we need to be careful about that. 1 Corinthians chapter 8 deals very similar passage. We won't go into that, but I want to go on to Colossians chapter 2. Let's see where we are in time here. Colossians chapter 2. Again, another congregation dealing with some similar things. Therefore, Therefore, no one is to act as your judge in regard to your food or drink or respect to a festival or a new moon or Sabbath day. Again, everybody's coming out of different backgrounds, and there may be people who still wanted to practice the Sabbath day because that's just what they've always done forever. It means nothing. It's a mere shadow is what he calls it here. But what they're saying is don't let them bind that on you, right? Some people will continue to do their family get-togethers for the new moon or whatever it is, but it means nothing to them. It's just a cultural thing that they do, but it means nothing. But others might want to bind that or say they couldn't do those things, and so it's important. But look down in verse 18. Let no one keep defrauding you of your prize by delighting in self-abasement and the worship of angels, taking his stand on visions he has seen, inflated without cause by his fleshly mind, and not holding fast to the head, from whom the entire body being supplied and held together by the joints and the ligaments grow with a growth which is from God. And so we have like these things that people are holding on to, these things that are outside the realm of Christianity. And he uses these examples here in visions that apparently are not visions, self-abasement. Are there religious groups that practice or teach self-abasement for righteousness' sake? There are. The Bible says that's not profitable. It's not profitable for righteousness. Inflated, and so there are those who are doing these things. Who is the head? Holding, in verse 19, those who are not holding fast to the head, from whom the entire body. Who is the head? Christ. Christ is the head of the body. And this is the thing, is like we forget, we get all these other things. Have you ever heard a preacher that has like a pet, like a hobby subject that they always preach about? Have you ever heard of those? Or anybody that has a hobby horse, as soon as you get around them, they're going to talk about this thing, right? They're going to talk about this thing. And sometimes maybe we get caught up on these things that we think are important, and we've lost sight of the head. And we think we're growing, but we're not growing according to this passage. We want everybody to grow with a growth which is from God. And that's the important aspect in keeping everything in line here in what we're doing. Did Paul and Peter were they at odds with one another? And we've talked about this in the conflict aspect. But sometimes when there are new Christians coming in and somebody's doing something that is completely contrary, maybe they need to be talked to, which is what Paul did with Peter, stood him to the face because of what was happening there in that congregation. But while we're in the book of Colossians, let's go over to chapter 3, beginning in verse 5. And this kind of goes back to what we're talking about. People are coming out. We are all, and we're continuing to be in this process of coming out of these things. Therefore, consider the members of your earthly body as dead to, and the list begins, immorality, impurity, passion, evil desire, greed, which amounts to idolatry. For it is because of these things that the wrath of God will come upon you, the sons of disobedience. And in them you all once walked when you were living in them. So who are we talking about? We are currently, Paul is writing to a group of Christians who once were dealing with these things. They were once dealing with these things. Probably still are. Verse 8, but now, so are they still dealing with something? Sounds like it. But now you also put them all aside, anger, wrath, malice, slander, abusive speech from your mouth. Do not lie to one another, since you are laid aside the old self with its evil practices. So as we come into the church, we're putting on Christ. Right, this is what it means. But these are things we got to get rid of. These are things that we have to set aside. Bury the old man. But sometimes we don't bury that old man. We bury him up to their waist, right? Or we don't quite bury the old person like we should. And so these are things that we're all dealing with, getting rid of. And so as somebody comes into the body of Christ, we need to help them be an example of what it is to live without these things, but also help them in this process. This is, again, part of that change. If you're changing your language, you're changing your way of thinking. Romans talks about our minds being transformed. I'm learning what it means to really love. I'm learning what real righteous love looks like. I'm learning what forgiveness of others and maybe forgiveness of myself actually looks like. These are huge, huge concepts for somebody to kind of, you don't just flip a switch on these, right? You don't just like, the next day everything's great. We're going to be struggling through these things, but doing it together, and we recognize where they are, recognize and see in them ourselves having gone through some of these things and help them in that process. And so as they're coming out of these things, we're helping them, modeling it, exampling it, showing them a better way, and helping them understand what it is to be a new person in Christ. And it's a challenge. Yes, sir. Mm. Yeah. Yeah. Were you all able to hear that? So somebody comes in they're in the process of putting on Christ. They're not quite there yet, right? And maybe they come in a fashion or in a way or talking, and they have different mannerisms, whatever. They're like very different compared to the community that how we're supposed to live here now. And then, but to the point that they're not changing fast enough, or they need to do this quicker, and maybe we get impatient with their growth process, and we get judgy. Why are they still doing that? Hasn't somebody talked to them yet about this, right? And instead of saying those things, maybe we should be a part of the process of helping them grow in that area instead of just stepping back and doing nothing, and recognize that everybody kind of. Is it fair to say that everybody learns differently? Is that a fair statement? Like all your teachers out there, you have all like all the acronyms and everything for all the different learning processes and all the different things. It's like the military and all their acronyms. But anyway, so yes, we all learn very differently. Would it be fair to say that we would all learn how to be a Christian differently and at different speeds and different ways? And it's fair. And we need to be patient as we're growing and doing these things. I want to look at a few things here. I'm just going to put these on the screen. We have much time. We do not have much time at all to go through this. So I will not. Some do's and don'ts. Are these helpful? These are fun. I like do's and don'ts. Do greet new people. That's important. We need to greet them. But don't just stand out and just kind of point them out, right? That's not good, right? Y'all are reading this. You can read. I don't have to read these to you. Do show them to class. We have a lot of class options, right? But do they know where to go, right or left, right? This hallway looks really exciting. All the painting down it. It's really exciting, but it maybe not. It's not for them. Might be for their children. So we help them. We can gather information as we're helping them, right? We give them information about classes, people who are new coming in, but we can also gather information, ask them about things, getting the breakdown on things, introducing them to other people, but also recognize that sometimes people aren't like. Some people are just more people-y than others, right? Some people have a greater threshold for new faces than others. So be aware. Learn how to read the room in who you introduce them to. Maybe if they're not handling it, maybe find a low-energy person to introduce them to. But be aware of that and help them. It's new for these people who are coming in, and I know that you guys know these things, but it's fun to talk about them. Do ask them if they have any questions. And you've heard the story about somebody who's been in the church for so long and they were never baptized. They know all the right things. They're answering all the right questions. And finally somebody said, "Why haven't you been baptized?" And the person said, "Well, nobody ever asked me." And that was wrong on his part, obviously, right? But there are things that sometimes we just need to ask. We need to ask the questions. Maybe do we try this? Is that the right time to do that? To convert them in the foyer? I'm not going to let them leave, right? We need to take it in doses. and again, learn to understand kind of what's going on. What brought them here? And you'll get a lot of different answers. You get a lot of different answers. Maybe they're just searching, and they Googled, and we were the closest thing. When we start talking about people coming here, by the way, people aren't coming here because of doctrine as much as they used to. People aren't coming here because, well, I read online, and you do all the things, the Bible things right. And that happens still. That does happen. But sometimes people come here because convenience, you're the ones that are closest, and I felt connected when I was here. And that sometimes some people feel their way into a group before they will think their way into a group. And so it's very important for us to think about this as well. How can we help them with their needs? Don't let them walk out without getting their contact information. Let them know that we want to serve, we want to help them. And do give them some. We have a plethora of information in the foyer, helping them find the information that might be pertinent for them. And we have a lot of different things out there. And these are, again, do's and don'ts. There are many others, right? We could talk about things, comments to say, comments not to say, right? And being very, very, very careful about how we communicate. But all of this is going back to, we want to create a culture here that's inviting, that people want to be a part of, and that every one of us is taking an active role in creating that environment here. The Bible calls us to do that. God expects us to do that, but are we aware that that is what we are supposed to be doing? And so anybody who comes in the doors that's a new face is a blessing. Heaven's rejoicing that they're here, they're close to repenting, and maybe we can be a part of heaven rejoicing and then making some better decisions for their lives, or helping them come closer to God. We get to be a part of that. Any thoughts or questions before we close tonight? Comments? All right, we have one more class and we'll wrap things up. Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.